All right, so we're going to do some notes on general conversions and the factor label method. So this is an introduction to the factor label method. Now, you have probably been doing conversions since you were in elementary school, whether you called them that or not. But we need you to use a specific method of conversions. And this method is called the factor label method. The reason we need you to do this is because it keeps you organized. It's going to show you, it's going to cancel your units, things like that. But when we get to chemical conversions, the level of complexity increases a lot. And in order to make sure that you have your system in place, we're going to do basic metric conversions using this system, the factor label method. And then when we get to chemical conversions, you'll already know the system. You'll just have to apply it to the chemistry. And that will help you be more successful, okay? They are much more complicated than what we're gonna be doing with metric conversions. But let's go ahead and do some of these class notes together. So open up your notes packet if you haven't already done so. Right after chapter 2, you're gonna find a page called General Conversions Factor Label Method, and that's where we're starting. Pause the video if you need to. But the very first question on there, or that we're gonna write about, is describe the factor label method for conversions, okay? The factor label method for conversions is a way to do several conversions as a single problem. A way to do several conversions as a single problem. And be sure of having the correct units in your answer. And be sure of having the correct units in your answer. Okay. Simple as that. It's just a method of doing a lot of conversions all as one single problem instead of conversion, get an answer, conversion, get an answer, conversion, get an answer, okay? And then you're going to make sure in this method that you have the right units in your answer, okay? So we're going to do a word problem that, again, you probably could have done when you were very young, but we're going to do it using the factor label method so I can show you what it looks like and then how to use that in calculations and to get the correct units. So the example says, Greg has chickens that lay 3 eggs per day. His daughter needs to make cookies for her school bake sale. She needs 2 eggs per recipe, and each recipe makes a dozen cookies. How many days will it take for her to get enough eggs from her chickens to make 144 cookies? Okay, so first off, we're going to write what's called conversion factors. So on my left side, I'm going to write conversion factors. Oftentimes a conversion factor is something that's standard that you would just look up or you might already have memorized. But in this case, these conversion factors are coming directly out of this word problem. So for example, how can we relate eggs and days in this problem? Well, if you read the information given, for every 1 day, there's 3 eggs produced by these chickens. Okay, so 1 day equals 3 eggs of production, okay? So when you have 2 things that are equal to each other and they have different units, 1 day, 3 eggs, that's a conversion factor, okay? That's what we're gonna use to convert. All right, another conversion factor is relating eggs to recipes. So 1 recipe needs 2 eggs. So 1 recipe is equal to 2 eggs, okay? There's gonna be 2 eggs used in every recipe, okay? So that's another conversion factor. And then another thing we know about recipes is each recipe makes a dozen cookies, so 12 cookies. Okay, 12 cookies. Now we have all of our information. We're going to start with what we're given in the problem that doesn't have something equal to it, and that is we need to make 144 cookies. How long is that going to take? So you find the actual question part of the problem, and that gives you your starting point. So our starting point in this conversion is 144 cookies. So I'm just going to write that out, and then I'm going to draw what we call a factor label grid. Factor label grid is a vertical line and then a horizontal line, and we're going to add our conversion factors along this line and then get an equal sign on this end, and that will give us our answer. Okay, and I'm going to show you how to use this. Okay, so first off, If you want to cancel a unit, you need to have it both above and below this line, okay? Secondly, when we're using conversion factors, for example, this one right here, 1 recipe equals 12 cookies, one piece of that conversion factor needs to be above the line and one piece needs to be below the line. You have to decide which way it goes, and that's based on what units you want to cancel. So if I'm trying to cancel cookies, I look over here at my conversion factors, and the only one that has cookies in it is this bottom one. 1 recipe equals 12 cookies. Okay, so since that bottom one has cookies in it, that's the one that I'm going to use first. I'm just going to circle it. And if I want cookies to cancel, well, it's on top of the line here, so I'm going to put it on the bottom of the line here. 12 cookies on the bottom is equal to 1 recipe, so that has to go on the top, 1 recipe. So when we're writing conversion factor, again, the two things that equal each other are going to go on top of each other. You have to use the units to determine which one goes where. So now cookies cancels out. We're not in cookies anymore. We've converted to recipes. Okay, now I'm done with this one. I need to use a conversion factor that has recipes in it because that's the next thing I want to cancel. This one has recipe, so I'm going to use this one next. 1 recipe is 2 eggs. Draw another line to separate my conversion factors. 1 recipe on the bottom for every 2 eggs. Now, why did I put 1 recipe on the bottom? Hopefully you're saying to yourself, because it's on the top here, so we need it to cancel. And in order to cancel, you have to have 1 on top, you have to have 1 on the bottom, and then they cancel each other. Okay? And then our last conversion factor up here, 1 day equals 3 eggs. Where am I putting my 1 day? Well, what's it equal to? 3 eggs. Which one of those am I trying to cancel? I'm trying to cancel eggs. That needs to go on the opposite side of our horizontal line. So 3 eggs for every 1 day. And now we're ready to do a calculation to get an answer. Now, if you're looking at this and you're like, how do I put this into a calculator? Well, very good question. If you haven't seen this before, you wouldn't know, okay? But this right here, just to copy this first part one more time, you don't necessarily have to do this, but it is the same as this. 1 recipe for every 12 cookies. All right, so 144 cookies times 1 recipe for every 12 cookies. And then times, and then we could write this one. And then times, and we could write this one. And then write equals, okay? If you prefer to write it out this way, that's fine. I know I prefer to do it this way. I think Ms. Varka might do it more this way, but either way is going to work. What we need to see is all of the conversion factors with all of their units, and you put it all together in one problem so that you can get a more accurate answer, okay? So when you have a line like this where everything is on the line, ones, whether you multiply or divide by 1, that doesn't affect your answer. So you can ignore ones. What you can't ignore is anything that's not a 1. Anything on the bottom we're dividing, anything on the top we're multiplying. So there's a number of ways you can correctly punch this into your calculator. You can do 144 divided by 12 because it's on the bottom, times 2 because that's on the top, divided by 3 because that's on the bottom, equals, and you'll get your answer. Okay, and that answer is 8 days. Another way that you can do it is 144 times 2. Write down your answer. 12 times 3. Write down your answer. And do your first answer divided by your second answer, and you'll get 8 days. Now, one thing that you cannot do, especially if you're using your cell phone as a calculator, okay, but you can't do this. Listen and watch while I do this. You cannot do this. 144 times 2 divided by 12 times 3, okay? Scientific calculators know an order of operations, so, and especially if you're using a scientific calculator, actually, scientific calculator, graphing calculators, if you do 144 times 2 divided by 12 times 3, what it's going to do is 144 times 2 divided by 12. It's going to get an answer. And then it's going to multiply your answer by 3 instead of doing the 12 times 3 first. The only way to get the 12 times 3 first is if you add parentheses around that in your calculation, which you can do, but it's more complicated. Easiest way is to go left to right. Things on bottom get divided, things on top get multiplied, and that's it. So 144, divide by 12, times 2, divide by 3, done. Then we don't have to do any more steps, okay? So 8 days of production will give us enough eggs for 144 cookies. All right, 3. Why is this method useful? Why is this method useful? Okay, again, it's giving you the right units. It keeps you organized. So organized is the key here. Organized. It minimizes calculations. Okay, minimizes calculations, makes it all one instead of equal, 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 and you have to round every time. When you do that, when you get these messy decimal answers, you're going to round too many times. Minimizing calculations means you only have to round once. It's going to give you a more accurate answer. Okay, all right, and then correct units obviously was one of the major reasons why we would use this method. Okay. Okay, metric conversion notes. We're going to talk about this line of letters. Let me just see what kind of, yep, we can see this. Okay, I'm going to write this out. You have to memorize the order of this line, including these slashes, okay? And you have to know what each letter represents. So I'm going to go through that with you right now. And then we're going to talk about how we use this next week when we learn conversions for the metric system. But this is the metric prefix line. This is not the entire metric prefix line. This is just a small piece that we want you to memorize. It goes this way, it goes that way, but we're going to just stick with this for our purposes, okay? Capital M is mega. That's a prefix, okay? It doesn't ever stand alone, but you've probably seen megabyte a few times, MB. Okay, so megabyte is 1,000,000 bytes, okay? K, lowercase k is kilo. Probably most often see that with kilometer or kilogram, okay? So again, these are prefixes. You have to put something here. Meter for kilometer, or gram for kilogram, or byte for kilobyte. Okay? H, we don't use as often, is hecta. Capital D is deca. Okay, decameter, decagram. Again, maybe not so familiar with deca, but decade we are, and that's 10 years, right? So deca is a prefix meaning 10. Capital S, or really huge S, okay, it doesn't necessarily have to be big, but S is a standard. This is the only letter in this line that is not a prefix, okay? The standard is the standard unit for whatever you're measuring. So for length, it would be meter, which is represented with a lowercase m. Okay. For volume, it would be liter, which is a capital L. And for mass, it's gram, which is a lowercase g. Okay. There's other things that go in here too. Bytes, like we've already talked about when we're talking about memory in a computer, for example. You can use seconds for time. So when that applies more on the small end, milliseconds, etc. Okay, but you can use other standards here as well. All right, on the small side of the standard, we have little d, which is deci. You probably heard decimeter, okay. Little c, much more common for us, centimeter. Little m, milli. Now, this is sometimes a little bit confusing for students because we have a little m right here, which means meter, and a little m right here, which means milli. But remember, milli is a prefix. It can never be by itself. So you attach it to something else. If you have two letters together, mg, that's milligram. If you just have an m, that's meter. If you have mm, that's millimeter. Okay, so remember that when you have two letters, the first letter is a prefix, the second letter is the standard. If you only have one letter, it's just a standard, okay? Single letters are standards. All right, so we got Millie, and then we have this Greek letter M, which is kind of like a lowercase u. You could draw a lowercase u and then draw a tail on the front end of it, and that represents micro. Okay, so that letter in Greek is called mu, and it represents micro. Okay, the reason why we have that is we already have a capital M, we already have a lowercase m, so we had to go to Greek to get another m for that unit. Okay, your assignment is going to be to memorize this line, but not just to memorize this line. We want you to use a mnemonic device to do so, and let me just describe that to you. You've seen them before. PEMDAS is sometimes what people say, but you can make a sentence for PEMDAS. Please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. So if you've heard that before, that's an example of a mnemonic device. It makes a sentence out of an order of letters, and that helps remember that order. That's the order of operations in math. Please excuse my dear Aunt Sally is parentheses and exponents, multiplication, division, addition and subtraction, right? So you can use a mnemonic device, it's a memory device, in order to help you memorize an order. I want you to make a mnemonic device for these letters. So create a sentence. It has to make sense. It has to make sense or else it's not a sentence. And it's not going to be easy to memorize if it doesn't make sense. If you throw in extra words, that's going to make it harder for you to make sure that you have the right letters in this line, okay? The slashes don't need to be a part of your sentence, but you do need to memorize the fact that there are 2 slashes after that first M, and there are 2 slashes before the last M, okay? Remember, this is a Greek M. So make a sentence using these letters for the first letter of each word in your sentence. If it's entertaining, it'll be a lot easier to memorize it, but just make a sentence, submit that as your assignment, and that's it for this assignment, okay? But make it memorable, because you need to memorize this for your test. When we get to our test and we're doing conversions, one of the questions is going to be write out this prefix line, and if you have that sentence in your brain, it will help you write that prefix line out. Okay, so email your teachers if you have questions, but that's all that you have to do as a submission for this assignment. Thanks.